Welcome back to the channel, everybody. We have another tier listing video, this time for cooperative games, because even I, someone who is incredibly mean, likes to sometimes work with people rather than against people. So what I've done is I essentially went through the Board Game Geek, top 1,000 games and just picked all the games that were cooperative that I enjoy, and I put them in this video, and I think we're at like 70 different games, so we have a lot to go through. So we're gonna jump right into it. Oh, and one thing I should note, I've had a lot of comments in some of my tier ranking videos asking me to rank the games within the respective tier. So the higher up a game is, for example, in the C tier list, means the better it is than a game that's lower ranked on the C tier list. You just wanted to create more work for me. I get it. I'm here to oblige. So the first game on our list is Betrayal at House on the Hill. Betrayal at House on the Hill sees players exploring a haunted mansion until one player becomes a traitor in a random horror story. So let me just tell you a story, okay? It's my first time playing this game. It was hyped like crazy, both by my buddy and a bunch of like online content creators at the time. We spend half of this game just sort of wandering around, wondering what the hell we're supposed to do. And he's like, oh, just wait for it. It's about to go nuts. Well, the encounter finally starts, and we have to play chess with death. That was the big reveal. It was the dumbest gaming experience I have ever had. I had played many times since then, and each time, well, significantly better than that time, didn't get good enough to really give me a good cooperative experience. The game is just, it's so random, and I know you're just supposed to sort of lay back and enjoy the thematic experience in the ride. But the ride isn't fun, and the destination it's the dumpster. Like, you spend half of the game meandering around doing nothing until the second act. And I know you're supposed to sort of like accumulate items and whatnot, but the process is it's so mechanically boring. This is one of those games I've played many times, and yet I still can't figure out why it's so popular. We're starting up this tier list very strong with a controversial D tier ranking, I'm afraid. Sorry. Next up is Tidal Blades 2, Rise of the Enfolders or something. Tidal Blades 2, Rise of the Enfolders is a cooperative narrative-driven board game where players take on the roles of heroic champions defending the realm from monstrous threats using dice-driven combat, character upgrades, and unfolding story chapters to guide their adventure. I initially thought the way you handled actions in this game was kind of gimmicky, but it was enjoyable, and it worked really well. You select an action card, and then you sort of place it on this grid and activate the other cards in either the row or the column in which you've placed it in. So somewhat like Marvel United, where you're just sort of like comboing and chaining events through previously played action cards. The cool thing is it makes you feel like you're always sort of doing something, where a lot of these types of games will typically have turns where you move and then you're just gonna do nothing. Like, you take one whack of the enemy and you're like, okay, I'm done. And the setting and story is pretty charming. I went through almost the entire campaign, and likely I will finish it in probably a week or two. It's a little shorter than something like Gloomhaven, I think, but I actually prefer that experience. I actually included this game in the solo gaming documentary I'm currently filming and hope to release in a couple weeks. Kim was gone for a week, so I thought, like, why not give solo gaming a shot? And I'm happy I gave this one a shot, despite knowing full well that I usually dislike these like little simpler miniature-based combat games. I'd probably give this one an A. I'd give this one an A tier. I really enjoyed my experience with it, and the narrative, like I said, it was charming. It was actually a good story, which I found was pretty rare with these types of miniature dungeon crawler board games. And next up is Mansions of Madness. Mansions of Madness sees players exploring haunted locales in an app-driven horror game that sees players slaying monsters, solving mysteries, and going crazy. We used to play this game a lot back in the day. Back before it was handled by the app. You had to do everything yourself. It was sort of like a one versus many game, which is why I sort of like the updated version a lot better, since it's sort of fully cooperative. This game, to me, is what Betrayal at House on Haunted Hill should have been. There's a lot of fun exploring, exciting events and sort of working together as a team to take down all the crazy monsters that seem to pop up never-endingly. Now, it is a Fantasy Flight game, so it sadly sometimes feels like it's sort of like this like never-ending expansion grind, because while I've replayed some scenarios, it for sure loses a little bit of luster through repeat plays. This is another one of those games that I've warmed up to over time, especially having played the latest edition a bit more and seen how beneficial that app can be. Or maybe I'm just used to seeing apps now in games, and so it's not as jarring anymore. Regardless, I give this one a solid B. It's a good game. It is. And next up is Spirit Island. Spirit Island sees players taking on the roles of elemental spirits defending an island from colonizers by chaining powers and creating devastating combos while using deep strategy. This is just such a great game that I wish I could play more. It's just Kim doesn't like cooperative games very much, and this one takes so long that it's hard to just like fit it in at the right time. But when you do play it, I love it. It's a fairly heavy game with a ton of stuff going on, and it can be quite a challenge when you first start playing because the first few games will have you feeling like you're not playing a game, but rather sort of like pushing things along. But once you figure the system out, the game sort of opens up. There's a ton of strategy here, and the spirits you play as they're just so amazingly different that it makes the game feel like so incredibly unique every single time. You know, I get excited just thinking about like all the different spirits and what they do and how they potentially synergize with the other spirits. And that is kind of the best part. This is one of the few cooperative games where I actually feel like I'm working with my friends rather than just kind of like working beside my friends, if that makes sense. And it's not like that cheap thing co-op games do where you get assigned some arbitrary role and you know, that's all you are in the game. You know, every time you're sort of like adapting and making the most out of your cards and getting stronger while building your own sort of like unique identity that goes along with the crazy unique powers that you already have. Yeah, if you couldn't have guessed it by now, this is going to be the first S tier rank. This is an easy S game. And next up is Dungeon Fighter. Dungeon Fighter is a chaotic dexterity-based dungeon crawler where players toss dice into a target to defeat enemies with style and laugh at their constant failures together. I feel like I've been singing the praises of this one in like the last few videos, and that's perfectly fine because it's a great cooperative game that can even act as like a cool icebreaker because this game has you like really engaging with those around you. Like some of the equipment you gain as you go down into the dungeon together sees you doing things like holding someone's hand to make them roll and various other crazy crap. Now, naturally, that type of thing, it's not going to be for everybody, but I find the entire experience it's fun. And this is honestly my favorite dexterity game, especially since it manages to provide a really cool and unique cooperative experience through just a beautiful combination of silliness and skillful play. This one is an easy A rank for me. I love this game. And next up is Time Stories. In Time Stories, players are time-traveling avatars solving mysteries through exploration and trial and error. Does anyone still talk about this game? And does it even still exist? I'm not sure. I got suckered into this game through the constant hype of content creators back in the day. And the very first time I played, yeah, I certainly thought it was cool and this sort of like novel experience. But by the second scenario, I was sitting there the entire time thinking to myself, like, what the hell is this? What am I doing here? The entire experience started feeling like a really bad choose your own adventure game. And sometimes that can be an enjoyable thing. Like, hell, I really like Consulting Detective. But this one it kind of got stale, and it got stale fast. I think because Consulting Detective feels a bit more open and provide players the sort of almost illusion of choice and planning. Like you feel like you can go and talk to anyone in the entire town. Whereas in Time Stories, it feels far more linear. Like you're sort of sitting in this like slow moving golf cart going down a residential street. And anytime you make the slightest mistake that you don't even know it's a mistake because nothing makes sense, you just have to reset and do the whole damn thing over again. Some of the scenarios were certainly better than others, and it did feature some cool and interesting surprises here and there. But I was pretty happy to ditch this thing and eventually move on to actual board games. So yeah, this one is another D. It's a D rank game for me. And next up is Captain Sonar. Captain Sonar sees players team up and pilot submarines in real time, shouting and coordinating attacks to sink the enemy in a chaotic and exhilarating mess of a game. This game will always be in my collection because it plays 8 players just so beautifully, and I kind of love the sort of team-based games. For some reason, team-based mechanics are just so rare in board games. And yeah, I'm including some team-based games in my cooperative list because they are cooperating. Actually, if you know of any really good team-based games, let me know because I am always on the hunt for them. I just think it's just a cool and underused dynamic. But Captain Sonar, it's a lot of hectic fun playing your role in the ship and just going crazy and doing your best to perform your task as quickly as you can and help your team try to fire, your torpedoes to quickly kill the enemy team. Yeah, you are essentially just playing a series of little mini-game puzzles over and over until you win or lose. But man, there is just something about that exciting team dynamic that makes you completely forget that and just get wrapped up in your role. This game just generates this perfect, super exciting and intense atmosphere. It's a shame it needs so many players to be good, but it's one of those games you keep around for those rare occurrences because it's definitely worth it. This is just a well-loved game, despite not making an appearance on my table very often. Easy A rank. And next up is Dead of Winter. Dead of Winter sees players balancing survival, group trust, and secret motives in a post-apocalyptic world filled with zombies and tough choices with a crossroads mechanic that adds unexpected narrative twists. Dead of Winter is a really good semi-cooperative game where you're sort of like all working together in building this like really interesting, enjoyable narrative in a zombie apocalypse. But the problem is some people will have their sort of like their own objectives and may actively be working against you. Even if it's not completely cooperative, it's still a really fun experience, especially when the turn comes and everyone pretends like they knew all along who the traitor was. And I think it really does come down to that crossroads mechanic. Like even today, it's still unique and interesting. It provides a great way to encourage interaction between players. Since one player is sort of constantly looking at a card to see if you make certain decisions and then read the text out loud. It's a good way to allow for a sort of organic story that you have some semblance of control over. Now, I should say that this game never really feels truly balanced, as a lot of characters provide some interesting, unique abilities, but honestly, in my opinion, that's part of the game's charm. I can be forgiving for a lack of balance when I know the purpose is theme and fun, and it's actually delivering on those things really well. So because of that, I would put this in the B tier. I think it's a really good game. Actually, let me know if there's any other games in the Crossroads series I should be checking out. The only one I know is Dead of Winter, and I think they made a sequel, but I don't remember its name. Let me know if there's any good ones. Next up is Xenoyshyft. Xenoyshyft is a sci-fi deck builder where you defend your base from waves and waves of monstrous enemies. At one point, I owned all versions of this game and expansions, and it's one of my biggest purchasing regrets because the game just sort of got old pretty fast. Hell, I still own everything, and I know I'll probably never play it again. But when I try to sell it, nobody wants to buy it. The game, no matter how many times you play it, it's pretty damn hard, and you don't feel like you have a lot of control over that difficulty. Like when you lose, oftentimes you're not really sure what exactly you did wrong to lose the game. Now, this is solved a bit better with the Dreadmire expansion, but even then, it's still a fairly lackluster play experience. I sound like I'm about to give this game a D, but I'm not. It's still a pretty decent game. And yeah, in some ways you can adapt and strategize to accommodate for the randomness, a tiny bit. And the game has good replay value and a very fun theme that makes you feel like you're sort of in the Starship Troopers universe at times, just sort of blasting away bug aliens. It's a C game. A low C, but it's a C game. Next up is Warcrow Adventures. So Warcrow Adventures is a miniature-based campaign game with app support and heavy fantasy themes made by my favorite miniature gaming company, Chorus Belly. Man, I wanted to love this game. I got sent this from the publisher after I did a sort of glowing review of their miniature game Infinity. It's probably actually one of the better videos on this channel, so definitely check it out. Even if you're not a miniature gamer, I promise, it's pretty good. And obviously I saw this and thought, well, if I loved Infinity, I'll love this game, send it over. I did not. I did not. I'm thankful Corvus Belly sent it, but I couldn't get into it. And knowing it was coming from the same publisher that gave me one of the most beautifully complex, in a good way, mini games I've ever played, it sort of made the pain all the more real. Like the miniatures themselves, they're pretty shitty, considering again that they are coming from a mini gaming company. Like some of the models didn't seem to fit well together, and there were some serious gaps between like a lot of the joints. And the narrative it's pretty bad, and it's app assisted, which is fine, I guess. It sort of centers on this like generic default characters, even though I didn't pick them, which leads to a lot of like these sort of strange story progressions that don't make a lot of sense. The whole thing just felt damn lazy in my opinion. The scenarios themselves, they're really long. Like we're talking 3 hours in some cases, and that's not rare either. Like every mission felt like this sort of tedious slog fest, and none of the enemies are interesting at all, and they felt hard to kill at times, but not in a unique and creative way that encourages cooperative play. It'd be fighting the boss monster in a video game, and that boss monster has like loads and loads of HP and just keeps healing itself. It does nothing else but heal itself. Eventually, you're gonna go crazy. If you've played Defiance, it's actually a much better game than this, and so this kind of seems like a step backwards for Corvus Belli. Again, I'm thankful for the game, but sadly, I have to give it a D. It was very disappointing. I love you, Corvus Belli. I understand. You probably won't send me another game after this, but I gotta be honest. I think you can do a lot better. Next up is Black Orchestra. In Black Orchestra, players conspire to assassinate Hitler in this suspenseful historical cooperative game, all while doing their best to work together and avoid suspicion and survive interrogations. I'm very surprised that this isn't higher up in the Board Game Geek rankings, because I consider this one a sort of lesser known gem and a really solid cooperative experience. I really enjoy the power balance in this game, as strange as that sounds, because while you feel like you're being overwhelmed sometimes, you never really feel like you can't do anything to change the outcome most times. And the game does a great job of making you feel like you're just on that line between defeat and victory, which in a cooperative game is really hard to pull off and really amazing when it is pulled off. And yes, luck is usually frustrating and gets in the way of skill sometimes, but here, luck becomes a sort of like this enemy that you can adjust and manipulate and sort of bend to your will. If you plan really carefully, there are very few times in this game where it feels like the game is just sort of snatching victory away from you arbitrarily. And like I said, that's a great thing in a cooperative game. Yeah, it's just a really solid thematic experience that is just, it's a great cooperative game. This is a easy A. And next up is Sleeping Gods. Sleeping Gods sees players exploring a vast open world in a cooperative storybook adventure, managing their ship and crew while uncovering hidden lore and trysts. Another campaign game that didn't really impress my friends and I. Even though I know it's one of those games that is well loved within the community, a single campaign took way too long, which I'm pretty sure most people acknowledge, because I know it looks like they changed that a bit for the sequel. And a lot of the quests sort of felt very like fetch quest-like, which is the worst type of quest in a video game. Everything just felt very tedious and repetitive to us. And we're not many sessions in, and if a campaign game isn't, sort of hooking us in the first few sessions, you're sort of better off jumping ship, because this is the time you're supposed to get hooked and is sort of immersed in the world as a group. And a lot of decisions you make narratively felt very disconnected and just damn random. Like it was like a choose your own adventure book at times, where you're sort of left scratching your head wondering, why action A led to result C. Like there was no connection, it made no sense. I really should try Distant Skies, because I've been told a lot of my criticisms have been fixed, but Sleeping Gods, for me, it's a C. It's a C rank game. It's not a bad game, but I would say it's a low C. Let me know if Distant Skies is actually like significantly better. So next up is Shadows over Camelot. Shadows over Camelot sees players playing as knights, completing quests while a possible traitor undermines their efforts. Bluffing, teamwork, and paranoia drive the narrative as you play cards to accomplish your goals. This is the OG traitor game. I played this so much back in the day. It's a super simple game, and honestly, I've played it somewhat recently, and I'm not sure it's hold up very well. The gameplay loop is pretty damn repetitive at times, and it never feels that challenging as I'm sort of debating where I should go next to use my cards. I think there are so many traitor games now that the reason I enjoyed this one was because that mechanic was sort of novel at the time. But now, now it's not new. All that I'm left with now is a fairly simple card discarding game that sometimes feels a little hollow. But it is a classic. I have much love for it. I have a lot of good memories with it, and I think it is a good family game. But for me, it's a C. It's a C. Next up is Oathsworn. Oathsworn is a narrative-driven boss battler combining tactical combat and deep storytelling as players journey through a dark, evolving fantasy world. There's a strong novelty in this game that for my friends and I, it eventually wore off as we played more scenarios. The encounters we experienced, they often felt very straightforward and weren't very exciting for the first couple of missions. At some point, we just all sort of felt like we were just playing cards to see how many dice we could chuck. It never felt like we were doing anything clever or tactically interesting. I did like the way the monsters sort of evolves over the course of the fight, but oftentimes it didn't really feel like we were doing that much to interact with that evolution. Like a lot of this game sort of felt like it was adding complexity for complexity's sake and game length, but not necessarily depth. Like you could position for better attacks, but even that positioning was pretty basic and obvious and fairly easy to pull off most times. I do think I'm a little biased towards these types of like bigger narrative boss battling games because honestly, I'm almost never impressed with either the story, the writing. Maybe I'm a snob, I don't know. But I do know that for my friends and I, this is a C-tier cooperative experience. It's not bad, but yeah, we didn't enjoy it. And next up is Specter Ops. Specter Ops is a hidden movement game where a stealthy agent sneaks through a facility hacking terminals while hunters attempt to track them down. It's a game filled with tension and bluffing. This has been among my favorite hidden movement games for the longest time. I find it very exciting every time we play it. It does this sort of great job of balancing the two different experiences. You're never really feeling like you're hopeless or aimless, which a lot of these hidden movement games tend to suffer from. I also really love the different powers and how they sort of synergize with your teammates. It's things like that that make a game truly feel like you're cooperating. Although I suppose this game, like many hidden movement games, can suffer from the one player controlling everything, but you can remedy that little mechanical issue by simply just not being an asshole. Usually I enjoy playing the hidden role, but this is one of the few games, at least in this genre, where I really appreciate the hunting experience with friends. You jump in your car, you put the tracker on, and you just run down that enemy hacker like a bug. This is just a quality game, and for now, it's an A-tier game. Next up is Elder Signs. Elder Sign is a cooperative dice game of cosmic horror where players race against the clock to seal away ancient ones before doom descends. I think I still own this one, but we never really play it because there just isn't anything here to draw us in anymore. It's sort of like Lovecraft Yahtzee. And while I'm fine with some games like that, like King of Tokyo, for example, I think when the competitive nature is taken out and it's just a purely cooperative experience, it feels really lacking. It doesn't feel like I'm working with my friends to overcome something bigger. It just kind of feels like we're each individually chucking dice till the game ends. And there's a good amount of downtime between turns, and surprisingly, and it sort of just kind of kills the game. I see what the game is attempting to do, which sort of like, distilling its bigger brother games into something more palatable, more accessible and easy. But in doing so, it loses a lot of the flavor and charm that those games have. And that's unfortunate. Not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a C-tier game. And next up is Paleo. In Paleo, players survive the Stone Age by taking on different scenarios that challenge players to gather food, craft tools, and avoid extinction. Really solid, family-friendly cooperative game where all the players feel involved with everyone else's decisions in a sort of meaningful way. And there's a good amount of exploration to contribute to a fun, sort of unknown factor. And yeah, it's punishing at times, but those times are typically a result of you and your friends not being cautious enough. And I kind of like that feeling of control, knowing that if you mess up, it was probably your fault. Because when you're exploring, you're going to encounter things that you can't beat on your own, especially from those bramble cards. And those encounters, along with providing good opportunities to work together, create a pretty fun story. And scenarios always feel a little different and throw something new at you each time. And it's cool because you're constantly adjusting your strategies to adapt to the new state of the game with your friends in order to survive. I think this one is a B-tier game for sure. Good B-tier game. And next up is Sky Team. Sky Team is a two-player co-op game where you silently pilot a plane using dice and asymmetric roles where one player is the pilot and the other is the co-pilot. This is a game that grew on me really fast, and I was super skeptical at first because it kind of seemed a little gimmicky, but I bought it because it was super cheap, and I'm really happy I did. But I love that the game develops over time with you and your partner sort of getting into this like awesome rhythm where you're both almost like effortlessly planning and knowing what the other will do, or you don't, and then the game is even more fun because you're just laughing at each other's failures. And it has this like little scenario or campaign element that's enjoyable, sort of adding new challenges that you and your partner have to navigate and overcome that changes the game in a fun, interesting way and keeps you and your partner always engaged. It's just a great game, and guys, it's super cheap. I don't recommend a lot of games to buy, but this it's so cheap. That's so cheap. And it's just fun. It's easy S game. And next up is Flashpoint Fire Rescue. Flashpoint Fire Rescue has players saving civilians from burning buildings and managing the spread of fire in this cooperative firefighting game. I remember buying this one when my friends and I got a little burnt out on Pandemic. But when I think back on it now, the game it's pretty darn similar, although it does a good thematic job making you feel like you're firefighting at times. We're rushing around and putting out constant fires and trying to save these people before the building falls on their heads. It's an enjoyable experience at times. The cooperative experience is good, and you rarely feel useless in this game, which is nice. But the rules are really, really light. Like this is a really good family game. But for my taste, it's not offering a lot of interesting choices in strategy. Like you sort of get a similar Pandemic experience where you're like, well, I guess you have a character that's good at putting out fire, so you go do that. I'm good at working on the hose, so I suppose I'll do that. And it's weird that you only need to rescue a set amount of people in a burning building. Like, if the game wants you to feel like a firefighter thematically, couldn't it kind of feel like shit knowing you're celebrating victory because only 3 citizens burned to death? Like, we get it, guys, we did it. Only 3 people burned horribly to death. We are the best. Still, the game is in my collection though, and it is a decent game. This is a C-tier game. Next up is The Crew. The Crew is a cooperative trick-taking game where players must silently complete mission objectives in specific card orders. This is a funny one because a friend wanted to play knowing I hated trick-taking games, but I sort of went along with it, and I'm kind of happy I did. I had to begrudgingly say it's a pretty decent game to him because even though it's obviously very simple, it is damn enjoyable. There are a lot of moments facilitated by such simple mechanics where we were pretty excited to get the right cards played. And it's kind of cool getting to this point in your group where you're reading each other's minds most of the time. But hell, it's even fun when you fail to do that and you just kind of laugh about the whole experience. It's just a really solid cooperative game that you can easily fit between larger games. Yeah, it's a good one. This is a B-tier game. It's a good one. And next up is Seventh Continent. The Seventh Continent is a sprawling cooperative survival game where players explore a mysterious continent, solve cryptic clues, and break curses through strategic card play. God, I hate this game. I hate it. Even just thinking about it, I'm reminded of all the decisions we made as a group that felt so damn arbitrary and would produce results that wouldn't even make any sense. Like, I'll examine something on the ground and then something will fall on my head, and the level of randomness just felt so disjointed and silly. Like, I feel it's trying to tell a story, but every session felt like this weird choose-your-own-adventure book where every page was unrelated to the page that came before. I get that the design of the game is basically a roguelike where you're probably going to die, and that's part of the fun, but the game doesn't really give you the tools you need to survive the randomness and stupidity. Like, when I die in Dark Souls, ultimately, it's my own fault. It's a skill issue, not necessarily a luck issue. There is no skill in this game. It's only luck. So if you're not telling a good story and the mechanics are dreadful, why am I here? Why should I bring my friends here? This for me is a D rank game. There's a lot of people that love it. It's pretty high ranked on BGG, but for me, yeah, it's a D. And next up is Burgle Bros. In Burgle Bros, players plan a daring heist in this cooperative stealth game where they'll be cracking safes and avoiding guards across multiple building floors. The problem I have with Burgle Bros is that the floors are all randomly determined each game, and while that's great for variety and it looks super cool, it can often leave you with games where you feel as though you couldn't win from the very start, which is not necessarily an enjoyable cooperative experience. But I know that randomness can sometimes lend to the game's enjoyment because there are times when you and your friends sort of feel like you're discovering things and exploring as you get to new floors. So I guess in that sense, it's a dual-edged sword. The character's abilities and the tools you have do really help facilitate experience where everyone feels like they're taking part and sort of doing something, which I've said many times before in this list, which is always a nice thing to experience in a cooperative game. I love the idea of Burgle Bros, but there are times that the game felt like it was letting me down, and at a full player count of friends, it does run a lot longer than you'd expect. So for me, it's a C rank. It's a C rank game. And next up is Descent. Descent is a classic dungeon crawler where players battle monsters, gain loot, and level up across a story-rich campaign using buckets and buckets of miniatures. This is a quality dungeon crawler and certainly one of the ones that made this genre so popular in board gaming to begin with. I love that the missions have goals and are not necessarily, kill all the monsters. I always preferred that in dungeon crawler. I want to sort of do something rather than just kill everything. And the tactics you employ in combat, they're just kind of chucking dice and fairly straightforward. It's a little light for my tastes in a miniature game, but I do see this as a beer and pretzel game, and it does a good job creating some exciting moments here and there. I don't know if this is rose-tinted glasses speaking right now, but I think I view Descent as a good B-tier game. And next up is Castle Panic. In Castle Panic, players defend a castle from encroaching enemies in this light cooperative tower defense game, which is great for families and beginner gamers. So even though there is this shared board where the castle is located that you're trying to defend, the game really is just a card game. And those cards can attack different areas on the board with specific sets amount of damage. Obviously you want to kill all the monsters to win, like any tower defense game, while staying alive as a team as long as possible. The game, however, is it's very beginner friendly. Too much so at times, because I don't feel like I'm making any sort of meaningful choices. I can see in my hand at any given moment that one card that is best in 99% of situations. So a big part of me starts feeling like I'm sort of just on autopilot when I'm playing the game. And while, yeah, you are cooperating, I don't really feel like I'm working with anyone, just kind of playing my best card for my hand on any given turn. And sessions can get very swingy and not really in a good way. A cooperative game should never make you feel kind of blah after a win. Like maybe you didn't really earn it because things just kind of went your way. This is not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not one that I have any interest in playing ever again. But it's decent, so I'm going to give it a C. It's a mid game. It's a C. And next up is Escape: Curse of the Temple. In Escape, players frantically roll dice in real time to escape a collapsing temple while managing teamwork and a bit of luck, but then just leaving your friends to die because they rolled bad. Escape is one of those games we bust out every single time when we have new guests come to our house, be they gamers or just, normal, regular human beings, because it always seems to hit. It's always a ton of fun, win or lose. And whenever we lose, you always end up playing more until you win. It's one of the few real-time games I actually enjoy, but it's just good, frantic dice rolling fun. Plus, you still feel like you're sort of working as a group, since you can pool your dice together or have someone sort of yell out, if they need saving, which happens in every damn game I've ever played of this. There was always that one player who went off by themselves and now they're stuck with all black masks and can't move. Yeah, it's usually me, but still, come save me. It's my game. I own the game. You come save me. Leave no man behind. Leave no man behind. It's a loud and crazy game, and we'll likely never get rid of it. It's an A-rank game. A-rank game. And up next is Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe sees players surviving on a hostile island using careful planning, crafting, and handling loads of fun and punishing random events. This is one of the most brutal cooperative games that we almost always lose, and yet I still gotta tell you, I'm always having a good time, even when I know things are just they're hopeless. The game just does a great job of evoking a sort of sense of discovery and exploration, which I find is really rare in most board games. Turning over those tiles and seeing what resources you'll get to use for your group survival, it's a lot of fun, and adding animals to the deck that might come back and bite you on the ass is literally sometimes. It's exciting and engaging. Yeah, it does that thing where you have your role and you end up being given a certain task, but I do find you branch out a lot more from your assigned role in this game and sometimes go around the island helping other people, because the game does a great job of employing a sort of push your luck element where you really want that new technology to discover, to save your group. But man, if you just put two people toward it, you can't go hunting now, or you can't do this other thing. There's lots of fun, tough choices and good laughs coming from failures that you and your group will most certainly always find yourself in. I love this game. Good S-tier game. Kim hates it, so I don't get to play it much anymore, but it is an S-tier game. And next up is Marvel United. Marvel United provides a streamlined cooperative game where players play cards to create combos and thwart villains, featuring characters with giant chibi-style anime heads. Look at them. So cute. I really wanted to love Marvel United, and I'm not the biggest Marvel fan, but I love the miniatures and there's sort of those big bulbousy heads. Sadly, this game is just, it's really light. Like, I'm actually keeping this game because at some point we'll have kids, and this one will be one of those games I introduce them to them first. So for now, it's just going to sort of sit on my shelves, just sort of languishing and never getting played. It's not a bad game. You know, the comboing is really good, and I do love how you kind of, you know, play off other people's hands, making the experience feel more like you're cooperating rather than, you know, the typical lighter games where you're just playing beside each other. I sound like I'm about to give this a bad ranking, but it's a solid, you know, mid C tier game. And I hope, you know, like I said, when we have kids, maybe it'll see more play. But for now, it's a C. Next up is Hanabi. In Hanabi, players will give limited clues to help their teammates play fireworks cards in the right order, without seeing their own hand. This is a fun little gimmick that is for sure enjoyable the first time you play, and it does facilitate an interesting and sort of new dynamic for a cooperative experience. But sadly, I wasn't the biggest fan of not being able to talk. It kind of impacts the mood of the game, and this is not a serious game, so it kind of feels disjointed. But there is this interesting thing that occurs where the more you play with the same people, the sort of better you get at sort of silently strategizing with one another and sort of reading each other. But it suffers a lot from the memory portion of the game, where you have to remember all the clues given to you, and sometimes for a little longer than I'd like. It's an interesting puzzle, but it's lost its luster over the years. So I think for my friends and I, it's a C tier game. It's a C. It's mid. And next up is Eldritch Horror. Eldritch Horror sees players traveling the globe, fighting monsters, closing gates, solving mysteries, and flipping piles upon piles of cards before an ancient one awakens. Now, I'm using this game as a sort of stand-in for Arkham Horror as well, which was among one of the first Fantasy Flight games I had owned. These games gave us tons and tons of hours of just silly fun. Yeah, it's certainly not everyone's cup of tea, because there are times when you feel like you're just moving around and reading cards, but it is fun to play, and the story, however disjointed, is one that is pretty engaging and collectively enjoyable. You know, deciding who should close what gate and who should tackle what baddie, and just generally delegating tasks makes the game feel very engaging and cooperative in its own way. Yeah, I just have a lot of great memories with this game, and yeah, again, it might be a rose-tinted glasses thing, but I'm giving it an A. Yeah, it is a fun game. And next up is Codenames Duet. Codenames Duet is a two-player cooperative take on the popular word game where partners give one-word clues to locate secret agents while avoiding deadly assassins. This one just wasn't particularly fun working together. You know, I get why they wanted to add the cooperative expansion, and I actually do own it, but honestly, I just own it for more cards for the regular game. It does fix the downtime though, obviously, but I just, I don't know, but I really like the competitive nature of the game, and seeing if I can, you know, get my teammate to guess more words than my opponent's team. You know, I need someone to glow to and make this a fun party game. So for me, I'm sticking this one in the C tier. Next up is the Big Book of Madness. The Big Book of Madness is a cooperative deck building game where students of magic must work together to close pages of a cursed book and defeat rampaging monsters. Now, here is a game you've probably never heard of, and that has been my collection probably for a really long time. It's a really cool game with multi-use card play where you're sort of coordinating your strategy with your friends, trying to, you know, put elements on offer and use them to gain benefits or provide benefits to others. The game provides a lot of ways to help other players, and that's obviously a really big part of the cooperative experience. You can even upgrade your spells as you go and sort of develop a sort of personalized identity, and there's lots of variability here through the monsters you'll encounter and the curses and the spells, which is really rare for a sort of non-campaign game. I think this is a great little gem, and I love the artwork. It's a cute little game. Very much overlooked, B tier. And next up is Mage Knight. Mage Knight sees players exploring dungeons, conquering cities, and optimizing your decks in a sprawling fantasy world that feels like what Heroes of Might and Magic, the board game, should have been. Now, this is normally an S-rank game, but the cooperative missions, they're not as awesome as some of the other ones, but it's still a very, very good, fun experience. Such deep strategy facilitated by the agonizing, in a good way, decision to use your hand of cards perfectly to orchestrate the exact thing you want to do in a round. Seriously, this is the crux of the game, and it does it really, really well. This is the only game that actually feels like Heroes of Might and Magic through its exploration, recruiting monsters, fighting big battles, and building your character up as you sort of progress through this awesome adventure. That it's too much fun to experience with someone else. The only issue I have here is that I wish there were interesting ways to cooperate together, as it sometimes does feel like you're just sort of playing beside the person. But still, it's an enjoyable cooperative experience, although I am pretty damn sure that I'm being completely biased just with my love for the base game itself. So I am giving this an A. Next up is Mechs vs. Minions. In Mechs vs. Minions, players program and upgrade mechs to fight off hordes of minions in this high production level campaign style game. I'm not the biggest fan of this game, but I have played it again somewhat recently, and I did kind of warm up to it in a very tiny way. I find it mildly enjoyable as a cooperative experience. Programming your own mech to move around, attack, and rotate has its own charm, and each turn your program becomes a bit more complicated, leading to some instances where you just kind of might mess up and sort of laugh at the results. And almost all the enemies are these tiny and easy to kill minions, which I know leaves a lot of players feeling pretty damn satisfied because you're sort of blowing away these little guys. It's sort of like a power fantasy of the game. Maybe I'll play this game some more in the future and see if it rises, but I still find the gameplay a little repetitive and sometimes a little boring because of that repetitive nature. So for now, I'm gonna stick this in the C tier. But this is certainly better than, I think I gave it a D in my BGG Top 100 video, so it's a step up. And next up is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. In Sherlock, players read through interviews, newspapers, and clues to solve dense mysteries better than Sherlock himself. Now, I understand a lot of people won't even see this one as a game. In a lot of ways, it kind of isn't. You're just kind of passing a book to your partner and reading a story that you kind of interact with slightly. But man, it's still pretty damn enjoyable. It's fun to talk the entire thing over with your partner and sort of deduce together where you should go next and know who is looking suspicious. It's a type of game you play on the couch by the fire instead of sort of hunched over your dining room table. And when you play, don't get too concerned with how Sherlock solves the case. Trust me, because in the end, you can't compare how you did to him. And there isn't really any reason to, because Sherlock he's kind of a god, and you'll never understand how he's able to make these magical leaps of logic. He just does it. So yeah, just concentrate on yourself. It's a great little story game that I think is a well-deserved B. And next up is Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon sees players exploring a dark reimagining of the Arthurian legend in this narrative-heavy survival game. Tainted Grail felt like I was playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons with the worst possible dungeon master around, who just sort of railroaded us from point A to point B as I get sort of forced fed into exposition dumps and randomly just all along the way. Mechanically, it's also a little boring and lacks depth that most other card games have. You can construct your deck, but it's fairly limited as a sort of you string together combos that don't feel particularly fulfilling. The game also felt a little grindy as you spent many resources to gain time, but then you're using that time to get more resources to expand your time more. And the grind isn't helped by the lackluster combat. You draw a few cards at the start of the battle and you try to get matches between symbols. It's a little puzzle, I suppose. But it rarely feels like other players, are sort of cooperating with you to solve that puzzle. It's not a game that I have an interest in continuing. I think we might have played 3 or 4 sessions. I don't know. It's a D-tier game. Yeah, I don't like it. Next up is Mysterium. Mysterium sees one player playing as a ghost, providing image clues to other players to help them solve their murder. Mysterium is basically a much more complicated and perhaps slightly cumbersome version of Dixit. I mean, but it is a good game and it has its moments. But I have always hated how you can vote on other people's guesses for their clue. You're working together, but you're happy when they get it wrong. It's a weird dynamic. I still own it and I play it once in a blue moon, but honestly, you're probably better off playing Dixit because it feels almost exactly the same and doesn't have a bunch of annoying setup and strange rules. I'm being a little harsh here. It does at least provide a cooperative experience that Dixit isn't able to provide. So I would give this, it's a C. It's a C, a high C. And next up is Fury of Dracula. In Fury of Dracula, one player becomes Dracula, evading hunters across Europe in a game of cat and mouse and hidden information. I think I've been buying each new version of this game since it moved to Fantasy Flight. I really like this one. It's a brilliant team-based hidden movement game. It's tense and fun, regardless of what side you play. As Dracula, there are times you feel like so powerful and immense, while other times you're just scared shitless you're going to be found, and you're just like running for dear life. The cool thing is it's one of those hidden movement games where you rarely feel aimless. Like you always feel like you have your overall objective and the closer, more obtainable, smaller objectives that are always at hand and sort of encourage you to keep going down that path, to keep you engaged and keep you active. The only thing keeping this game from an S tier is that it's very long. So it sort of puts this game in that category of event-style game that you kind of have to pre-plan ahead. But regardless, it's still a well-deserved A. It's a great game. Next up is Marvel Champions, the card game. In Marvel Champions, players team up as iconic Marvel heroes in this living card game and face off against villains using customizable decks. One of the few living card games with a core set that actually feels pretty damn complete. Like you can build a good amount of decks with this thing and just this thing alone. And that's a good feeling, especially in these types of games. The one thing I really enjoy about this game is that every game left me feeling like I could do quite a lot on my turn, whether it's, playing a specific card at the right moment or flipping my identity card to get that alter ego side. Plus I can pick who I want to attack because the game provides multiple threats beyond the main villain. And those cards from your hand can be, they can be event cards, they can be upgrades, allies or support cards, and all of them, they feel pretty impactful. The issue, however, I have is that I think deck building is a major draw of this game. And it's not as if I'm bringing friends over to build decks with me. I'm here for the cooperative experience, not necessarily the deck building. And yeah, and there's a few other reasons, but I'm not the biggest fan of this game. This also is one of those games that I've played recently at a convention, and it actually caused the game to rise a bit above where I put it, I think, in my BGG Top 100. So will it keep rising? Maybe, maybe not. But for now, B. Next up is Police Precinct. Police Precinct has players solving crimes while managing city chaos like thugs and various other fires they'll need to put out throughout the entirety of the game. Like most of these style of cooperative games, you go about dealing with the threats, in this case thugs, popping up randomly throughout the city, all while trying to deal with the overarching case of trying to solve a murder. And you're sort of like, you're cooperating with your friends to sort of make a balance between doing these two tasks accordingly. I think this is one of those games where there are a lot of attention paid to theme in the design process, and perhaps a little less into making things balanced and mechanically innovative or sometimes sound. Like you do feel like a group of officers doing your best to clean up the city. So that is a sound accomplishment, but I wish we could get this really cool theme perhaps in a better game. But Police Precinct, it's not a bad game for sure. The entire experience was just, it got a little old, and yeah, I think this is a C tier game. It's a C tier game. Next up is Dark Souls, the board game. Dark Souls is a punishing dungeon crawler where you do your best to memorize enemy patterns, grind heavy progression, and battle tough bosses that all feel the same while weeping for the waste of an awesome IP. There is just so much wrong with this piece of crap game. Like the rooms are all identical on both sides. There isn't much for cool terrain elements that can add a sort of tactical component, like things to hide behind or things to destroy or hazards to avoid. And the space that you do play in is like so relatively small. Like provide players the opportunity to maneuver and have some strategic fun. Like let me do what I do in the game and just roll everywhere to win. And all the enemies, they feel exactly the same. They all behave more or less the same, making each session feel like this like dreadful, boring, and homogenous grind. And you're not offered a lot here in terms of combat for decision making. You move up to the enemy and you just kind of whack them. That's it. That's not interesting. That's not engaging, and it's not cooperative, and it's not fun. Steamforged, in my opinion, has become infamous for producing IP slop for board games. They conduct their huge Kickstarter affairs with loads and loads of garbage, and then when the game ships, everyone discovers the game that they paid hundreds for is either terrible or woefully mediocre. I know I shouldn't be saying this because I'm a content creator, and we're all supposed to be diplomatic and sort of just shills for publishers. But I would generally be wary of any Steamforged game. I assume they're bad, and then I wait to see whether or not they're at bare minimum tolerable. Yeah, this game is a D. It's if you can't tell, this is a D game. And next up is the Fellowship of the Ring, a trick-taking game. Fellowship of the Ring sees players retelling the journey of the Fellowship using classic trick-taking mechanics with unique powers for each character and enemy. I've said this before when I was looking over the crew. I've never been a fan of trick-taking games, but I really do enjoy this one. It's a fairly simple one, but it adds enough flair to differentiate itself from other trick-taking games using its use of the ring cards. Also, I really like the trading you can do in that start of the scenario. It adds a nice bit of cooperative planning and trying to figure out, each character's individual weakness or their strengths. I will say the experience is pretty damn similar to the crew in terms of how it plays cooperatively, but that's okay. I think I do like the crew a little better because some of the objectives feel a bit more creative, but this is still a good game, and I think this is a good B-tier candidate. And next up is Mice and Mystics. Mice and Mystics sees players taking on the role of tiny little mice as they fight big baddies, explore new scenarios, and roll tons and tons of dice. This is a good game if you had some young kids who you wanted to introduce to, a mildly scary but exciting dungeon crawling experience. But sadly, I don't think this game has held up over the years. Now, the story is still really decent, and it's a pleasant little narrative-driven game. You read aloud from the storybook and then get to work cooperating by conquering the new and unique scenario that the chapter offers. But we went through a good chunk of this base game and realized this is one that is meant to just I think it's meant to sell expansions because the experience doesn't feel complete in the base box. The main problem here, though, is that everything is determined by a dice roll. Movement, combat, defense, hell, even looking for items puts you at the mercy of that die roll. You can increase the odds with more dice, but the entire thing just felt silly. And the entire process just got repetitive quickly. It's a shame too, because I really wanted to enjoy this one. I don't hate it. It's a C, probably a low C. No, a mid C. It's a mid C game. And next up is Not Alone. In Not Alone, one player is the evil alien hunting down stranded survivors while the rest try to evade capture through hidden movement and bluffing. This one is so easy to get to the table and plays really quickly. Plus, it's pretty unique. It has a lot of these tense moments as you're essentially working together with your teammates and cooperating, but at the same time, collectively trying to play mind games with the monster and anticipating where they will go. And as the monster, you're sort of doing the same thing. This is a game that does the limited cooperative, communication thing really well because it's not artificially just telling you to shut up in the rulebook. It forces you and your teammates to sort of discuss things in a manner that means something to you, but not necessarily to the monster. It's a cool dynamic that the game facilitates, and it's enjoyable. And I think for that alone, I would put Not Alone in, I give it an A. It's an A. It's a low A, but it's an A. And next up is Mass Effect. In Mass Effect, players command a squad of elite characters through missions using dice and story cards. So this is a beer and pretzel style cooperative game that I felt was pretty damn boring, all things considered. The turn order system is a little strange, and the enemy spawning feels wonky and oftentimes irritating. This is one of those games that for sure was made to sell expansions because the campaign is just it's a few scenarios you could finish in probably a longer gaming session, and I think we got through almost all of it, but I know at some point we just got bored and stopped playing, and eventually, we're definitely not going to be looking at any expansion in the future. Not for us anyway. And I know that this game is supposed to be light, but it's also really damn easy. We buzzed through most of the game fairly quickly. We never felt pressed or challenged. Every action just felt obvious. And the scenarios bizarrely started feeling like they were sort of getting easier as we progressed. I want a good fight. I want to feel challenged when I'm playing a cooperative board game. And I don't want a miniature game that feels like it was made decades ago. But maybe it's just because, I don't know, maybe I'm not a big fan of the IP. But man, going forward, I will forever be skeptical of all board games attached to video game IPs. Because, 9 times out of 10, it's pure slop. All that being said, I sound like I'm about to stick this on the D list. I'm not. I think this is a very mediocre game. So I'm going to give it lower C. Next up is Gloomhaven. In Gloomhaven, players navigate tactical combat scenarios, level up persistent characters, and change the world through branching choices in this epic campaign-style dungeon crawler. So this is the game that started off the never-ending trend of gigantic campaign-style cooperative dungeon crawler games. And honestly, I have yet to find one that plays as well as Gloomhaven. I think it really has stood the test of time, even though I know it's not even that old. It's still better than all other campaign games that I have played since. I generally remember being super impressed with the combat system in this one because I had played so many dice-chucking, uninspired dungeon crawlers. This one stood out like was a diamond at the time. The combat is really interesting and it's creative. Making decisions is a fun experience as you sort of work with your friends to overcome each new obstacle. Each of you putting your strengths together and figuring everything out together. You're really part of this adventuring group. The progression is enjoyable, although I have a hard time remembering the story between sessions, but I understand that that's on me and not necessarily the game. You'll actually see I'm pretty biased towards a lot of cooperative campaign games because 9 times out of 10, they just don't hold my attention. Oh, and I love the world building in this game. It's nice to see a designer put so much love and effort into their fantasy setting that goes beyond the typical, D&D high fantasy. Not much more needs to be said about this one. This is an S-rank game for sure. Next up is Witness. In Witness, players whisper clues across rounds to piece together a mystery through logic and deduction. So everyone has a different clue, but everyone needs all of the info to end the case. So you go around whispering to get that information. Some rounds you give information, while other rounds you receive information, and you can't ask any questions. Yeah, I know, this game is nothing more than sort of broken telephone, but, it is pretty fun, and it is novel in its own way. I'm all for games that provide a bit of novelty. Even if it's not the typical games I enjoy, I want games in my collection to feel different. And this one for sure feels This one for sure feels very different. So I want to put this in the C tier. It's almost like this different category of game all on its own, but it's a decent game. And next up is Space Alert. Space Alert sees players program ship commands in real time while dodging threats and coordinating with an always panicking crew. This game reminds me a lot of Escape, especially since it plays in 10 minutes and has a CD soundtrack, which is great. You run around the ship, trading cards, and you have to do things that the soundtrack tells you to do. Like one moment you'll hear communications down, and so you have to stop talking to your teammates. It's basically just silly fun. Not a lot of strategy, much like Escape, but just a lot of laughs. I think I like Escape a bit better for a real-time cooperative experience, but this one, it's still pretty good, and it's a solid B game. Next up is Sentinels of the Multiverse. In Sentinels of the Multiverse, players fight comic book villains with card decks full of combos and powers, each representing a unique superhero that makes you feel like you're engaging one of the most complex Excel spreadsheets in your entire life. I feel like I can't say too much about this game that I haven't said a million times in other videos, so I'll just keep it short. The entire experience is woefully tedious. I despise going through all that villain's extra crap and pouring through cards for keywords and all the other overhead nonsense I'm asked to do, and none of my friends enjoy it either. So it makes the game a cooperative nightmare. It sucks because every time we played this, we really wanted to like it because the theme is really cool. Sadly, it feels like a lot of work. If you want more information on it that I've given, check the Games I Hate video because I give this one a D. Next up is Ghost Stories. Ghost Stories sees you using your monk powers to fend off waves of ghosts in a village constantly under siege that will leave you and your friends feeling like everything is hopeless and you're a masochist for playing. This has got to be the OG of difficult cooperative gameplay. I've played this so many times and I can count on one hand how many times we've won. But of course, that is part of the fun. It's a struggle against the game with your friends, and no game does that better than Ghost Stories. Whenever I played it, it almost always felt like those tower defense games where you're up against a never-ending onslaught of baddies with your friends, and you're really just hanging in there for as long as you can because you know you're probably just gonna lose. I don't play it much anymore though, so I feel it kind of overstayed its welcome, at least in my collection. But it is a good game, and it is one that if you haven't played it, you definitely should. I would give this a B. It's a good B game. And next up is Lord of the Rings, the card game. In Lord of the Rings, the card game, players build decks and guide heroes through scenarios to work together to conquer familiar enemies and complete fun, intense quests, all through tactical card play. This is a great game that has been updated, but all of my stuff is from the previous edition, so I'm basing it off that. I really like this one because the stories that are told are fairly self-contained. You know, you can jump around and play whatever scenario in the books that you like, and sometimes I prefer that than the larger persistent storyline, which this game also provides. But that's only if you have an endless amount of money and you can afford all the expansions. It's funny though, this is one of those games that feels like it's supposed to be played solo, but I still think it works really well cooperatively. You can play as so many cards to other players, providing support when necessary and going beyond the typical, task delegation, which really is a big part of my enjoyment of cooperative games. I want to feel like I'm helping and working with friends. But you still get that sort of assigned role fun because you have to decide who will quest and who will attack or who will defend. But that sort of strategizing happens fairly organically between rounds instead of, one person being chosen for the given role for the entire game. You all sort of like working together to find the optimal strategy every single time. And it's a lot of fun. And for that, this is an easy A game. Yeah, great cooperative experience. And next up is Too Many Bones. Too Many Bones sees players using custom dice and gear to take down baddies in a tactical RPG with creative mechanics. There are so many annoying keywords in this game and rules overhead and that just bogs the game down and made it not very fun. Like the game just feels really overproduced. I don't think I have a blanket hatred for large amounts of overhead, but I think in games like this or Sentinels, there isn't much here to entertain me and keep me having fun. And so I hyper fixate on the overhead because I'm not having a good time to begin with. And the downtime in this game, it's pretty harsh. Like at the full 4 players of what we usually played at, especially given that the game, it's not particularly heavy. Like trying out all the different abilities is fun, I guess. And I do find that if you treat the game more like a roguelike game, the experience does get a little better. But I do think a lot of the fun that comes from this game is on testing all these like different builds and running with them in the game. And while I can see that being actually pretty damn fun for a solo gamer, it's not one I enjoy as a cooperative experience. Like I enjoy building magic decks, but I don't want to do that shit in a group, So for me, this is a D rank game, but I should try it at 2 players or maybe even solo, and maybe it'll change my mind. But for me, for now, it is a D rank cooperative game. And next up is Aeons End. Aeons End is a cooperative deck builder where you never shuffle and must tactically manage your hand to defeat bosses. The not shuffling thing it's pretty interesting because it makes you feel like you have a bit more control and makes you feel like you have perfect knowledge of what comes next. So in essence, you're really trying to build a combo deck rather than deck build per se. It's a game where I had a lot of near counters with losing, and I think that's usually the mark of a good cooperative experience. I want to feel like I'm always one step away from defeat to generate some excitement. But I'm still not the biggest fan of this game because there are times when the nemesis feels a little unfair and you can't counter him. And the choices you make, even though, comboing can be fun, they didn't feel involving or engaging. Like a lot of times it felt obvious to me what I should do on my turn. And I am never a fan of that sort of autopilot experience. So for me, this is a C tier game. Maybe even a lower C tier game. And next up is Horrified. Horrified sees players facing off against classic monsters like Dracula and the Wolfman in a family-friendly, cooperative game, working together to complete unique objectives and save the town. So it's a super light game that still provides some good tension here and there. And obviously, you're mostly getting this for the theme. It's a lot of hunting down classic monsters from fiction and seeing how each creature has its own specific ways to be defeated and sort of mess up your day. You run around collecting items you'll probably need and basically just solving the game's puzzle before taking on the big final boss. It's one of those games that gives you enough stuff to do so that you and your investigator buddies have to work together and decide on who is going to do what. You kind of have to delegate tasks. As I said, mechanically, this game is very simple, and you're mostly just playing this one with friends for the theme alone, and that's fine. And for that, I think it gets a B. It's a B tier game. Next up is Freedom, the Underground Railroad. In Freedom, the Underground Railroad, players work together to help slaves escape the South before the Civil War in this historic cooperative experience. I'm a big fan of Academy games and their historic series games. It's always a really cool experience seeing how their games try to portray a period in history as best they can while still providing a pretty enjoyable experience. The tense thing about this game is that there is no saving everyone, and the game forces you to make really tough decisions as a group where sometimes you'll have to leave some slaves to the catcher to save a larger group, and that's a really interesting decision to make. It's a game that sees you slowly ramping up to build tension, where the early bit of the game is fairly easy and the puzzle isn't too complex, but once that catcher, starts moving all over the place, things get really difficult fast. But the game can be a little dry at times, though, and mechanically, sometimes a little wonky. But I still think it's a solid B-tier game. Yeah, I'm happy I own this one. Next up is Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire is a deck-building roguelite game where players climb a deadly spire, defeating enemies and upgrading their deck on each run. This one was pretty damn cool, and the few times we played, we did legitimately find ourselves devising new strategies to tackle the same objectives, which made the game feel fresh, and it made it feel engaging with each play. Unlike a lot of these, beat up the baddies type games. And the fact that it's based off a video game, it's pretty impressive, because man, this list has a good amount of IP slop that's yet to come that has come before. So get excited for some D-ranking of these mediocre video game franchises. But to Slay the Spire, the cool thing is that despite getting stronger, you never felt overwhelmed by having to keep track of too much garbage on the table, which is always a bonus. I have to say this is probably one of my favorite cooperative deck builders. It's certainly not an experience with as much depth as I'm accustomed to, but for its genre, I think this one is packing a bit of a punch. I think I give this one an enthusiastic A tier. Yeah, it's a really solid game. And this is coming from someone who has never played the video game, if that matters. And next up is Leviathan Wilds. Leviathan Wilds sees players scaling enormous monsters in this cooperative card climber while you carefully plan routes and manage your cards to avoid falling before you kill the big baddie. This one is nice and quick, which for us is exactly what we want in a cooperative game sometimes. Plus the game sort of reminds us of Shadows of the Colossus, which I played a ton of, except that, there's a lot more edible mushrooms here and you can throw them at people, which is a huge bonus, I guess. And there's a good amount of variety in this game as well. I'm especially a big fan of the binder maps like Jaws of the Lion. There's this trend in gaming I'm pretty happy to see because it makes setup super fast. And for a cooperative game, that's kind of what I want. My only criticism, though, is that I wish there were few more ways to interact with friends, because for me, that's a big part of cooperative gaming. But there are mechanics here that are interactive, such as, player powers, and I love the throwing mushrooms mechanic as a means of interacting with players, and, sort of being able to play cards on other players' turns. Actually, you know what? There is some good interaction here, and so I think that bumps it up into the tier that I was thinking. For me, I was going to give this a B, so instead, you know what? I'm feeling generous today. I'm going to give this an A. A low A, but an A. And next up is Lord of the Rings, Journeys in Middle-earth. Journeys in Middle-earth is an app-assisted cooperative campaign game blending exploration, combat, and adventure across Tolkien's legendary lands. There is a great amount of depth here in this game's card system, which is great. There is some randomness here, yeah, but mostly you do have to strategize the card preparation and placement. And it makes the whole experience feel very satisfying because when you pass a test, it doesn't feel like you just got lucky by chucking some dice. You and your friends, you accomplished that task through your hard work. And the app is actually pretty good, despite being very skeptical of it at first. It really does make the game far more accessible than it would have been had it gone for a sort of like Dungeon Master approach. This is a great game everyone needs to try, at least once. It's a great cooperative experience that is a blast to play with friends who love Lord of the Rings. Obviously, you could put this in no other tier but A tier. And next up is the classic Pandemic. In Pandemic, players coordinate to stop global outbreaks by curing diseases and managing hotspots before time runs out. Perhaps the OG cooperative game that brought tons and tons of people into the hobby. Hell, I used this myself to convince people how awesome board gaming was. But as time went on, it just became a game that didn't particularly interest me anymore. I got a little bored. of how the roles felt very restricting. You know, the constant barrage of viruses felt more tedious and annoying than exciting and challenging. But I still respect the game, and I likely wouldn't say no if someone really wanted to play it, since it's still in my collection and likely probably will never leave. However, for me, you know, it's starting to feel like a B-tier game, probably a mid-tier B-tier game. And next up, fittingly, is Defenders of the Realm. Defenders of the Realm sees players stopping evil generals from corrupting the lands in this fantasy Pandemic-style game. This was heralded as essentially the fantasy version of Pandemic. If you wanted, you know, generic fantasy crap instead of curing viruses, you bought this one instead of Pandemic. But a big difference here is that discarded enemy cards are not reshuffled into the deck. And that sort of kind of sucks because in Pandemic, it gives you a little bit more sense of control because you have an idea of what could be coming up next. Whereas in Defenders, it's more random. The playtime, at least for my friends and I, was also a big detriment because it's a little too long for how light the game is, and that really impacts the enjoyment of the game. And back to the luck issue, you don't have a lot of ways to mitigate bad luck. You know, like you can discard a card to roll an additional dice, but I don't know if I'd call that much of a mitigation. I actually sort of view this game as more of a push your luck cooperative experience. Also, I don't really like that the game seems to encouraging, you know, figuring out who the best player on the team was. Like that doesn't facilitate a cooperative experience. But I don't hate Defenders. I don't think it's as good as Pandemic. I would probably still just give this a C. Maybe a lower C. Yeah, it's a C. And next up is Nemesis. Nemesis is a semi-cooperative survival horror game where players navigate a spaceship infested with alien threats, trying to complete personal objectives while staying alive and deciding who they can really trust because they might just find themselves launched into space by a shipmate. I don't really bother with all the new additions because they made, I think, in my opinion, they made the perfect game with the original. You know, it's thematic, it's tense, it feels like you're struggling and working together throughout the entire session. And even with a traitor, it simply gives you some new threat to work together with against. This is a super fun game that I wish played a little quicker because as it is, it's hard to get to the table. Like, this isn't the style of game you drop on people in the middle of a game night. You kind of have to have this set up and ready to go before people come over. So it makes playing it kind of difficult. But when it does make an appearance, I am always happy. The game provides enough things to do that you never feel aimless, and you never really have to worry about one player controlling everyone else because you kind of have your own shit to worry about. And, you know, just trying to do your best to survive when the shit hits the fan and the aliens just start pouring in. This, in my opinion, is one of those classics that people will probably still be talking about years from now. I think this is a solid, great S-tier game. And next up is The Grizzled. In The Grizzled, players survive the emotional toil of World War I in this minimalist cooperative game where players navigate missions using limited communication and trust. This is a difficult game, which really is a big part of the cooperative enjoyment because I think what makes a good cooperative game, it is that challenge. It's sort of like a trick-taking game since you can't communicate what is in your hand, and it requires a bit of that like mind reading I'm really fond of. There's not much more to say about this one, but it's worth seeking out if you're looking for a sort of in-between game that you can play cooperatively, even if the cooperation makes you feel sometimes like a bit like guesswork. Still though, I do think The Grizzled is a solid B-tier game. And next up is Forbidden Desert. Forbidden Desert has players working together to recover airship parts while managing water and surviving sandstorms. I kind of get why this game is so popular, and I understand the importance of having very easily, accessible games. But I think you can do light a lot better than this. This is, to me, feels like a cooperative board game equivalent of a really bad kids movie where the kids are entertained because crap is happening on screen, but the adults are sort of bored out of their mind. There's a lot of luck here in your card draws and where you place your tiles, and the choices you have in this game are they're kind of borderline non-existent. It's so boring, and like I said, it's not just because it's a light game. It's simply a light game done poorly. Look at almost anything done by Bruno Cathala. You can do light a lot better than this. But I know there are a lot of people who enjoy this one, but for me, they're wrong, okay? The kids are wrong. I'm the one that's right. So for me, I would give Forbidden Desert, I'd give it a D. A high D maybe, but a D. And next up is Arkham Horror the card game. Arkham Horror the card game is a narrative-driven, cooperative game where you build investigator decks and make gut-wrenching decisions while facing cosmic horrors. This is a fun little card game that sort of does its best to shrink down the huge, bombastic, experience of Eldritch or Arkham Horror into an easy-to-manage card game, and I'd argue it does it pretty well. Each scenario feels wonderfully unique, and it's easy to set up, and I'm not required to remember a ton of information between sessions, and yet still experience a pretty enjoyable narrative. The mechanics, they are pretty damn light, mostly, and obviously a little random, but I still felt as if I had some agency when I played, and I walked away from the cooperative experience feeling like I worked as a team and made, a meaningful contribution. But my biggest issue is how finicky this game sometimes feels because you have to handle a lot of different stuff, and it's certainly not as bad as Sentinels or anything, but it's still a little annoying. And it's one of those games that requires expansions, and I wasn't really willing to invest more money into the experience. I'm stuck between a C and a B on this one, but I'm feeling generous. I'm going to give this a B. It's a B tier game. And next up is Legendary Encounters, an alien deck building game. Legendary Encounters lets players relive the Alien film saga in this atmospheric deck builder with escalating threats and lots of fun graphic violence. I'm using the Alien franchise of this Legendary Encounters line because it's my favorite one, but all of them, they're all pretty similar, and so this one will be the stand-in for the series. The game does a great job of making you feel like it's the second Alien film where you're just sort of overwhelmed with them, and you try, with your friends, or just to do your best to stay alive. Most games of this, we all kind of start expecting to die, and yet somehow it still provides a lot of fun, win or lose. When you reveal an enemy, it can attack and then sort of moves around the complex, and the hardest part is that you have to give it an all-or-nothing kill shot, meaning you have to work together for that big killing blow. And one of the cool things is that the game sort of evolves as you play, and so you'll get new objectives as the game progresses, forcing you and your friends to sort of adapt and overcome these sort of new challenges. It's a good game, solid B, I think. Solid B tier game. And then finally we have The Mind. The Mind sees players playing cards in ascending order without speaking, relying on timing and intuition in this crappy little card game. So you play cards with various numbers from your hand in the middle of the table and play them in order. This game gets repetitive very quickly, especially since it doesn't offer as much as The Crew, I think, which I know is not the same game, but it shares a lot of similarities. It just feels like a guessing game, and the experience got fairly old fast because all you're doing is trying to guess, when to play your card without any hints or tells from other players. There isn't really much to go on. Or, I don't know, maybe we just suck at the game. Regardless, I'm giving it a D. Yep. And that about wraps it up for the co-op tier ranking video. And hopefully this tier ranking list helps you in the future making some purchasing decisions, or maybe it just helps you facilitate some of the anger that you're going to express from me in the comments. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed it, guys. I'll see you in the next one. See you later.